Hello! Finally, here is your top 10 of Hashimoto Shinya video. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with Hashimoto, let me do my best to give you some background. He might be an unfamiliar name because the first thing that people talk about when they talk about Japanese wrestling in the 1990s is All Japan and the four top workers from there. That's how it should be, of course, because most people would agree that they were producing the best product during that period. But at the same time, over in New Japan, you had the three top guys from that company throughout the decade. You had Muto, Chono, and Hashimoto, the Three Musketeers. Between those three guys, most people would pick Hashimoto as the best worker of the three. You know, Muto is all about taste. Some people are big fans, some people don't like him at all. And Chono has some fans, but I would say more people that are more indifferent towards him than anything else. I mean, once he turned heel, he became more character than a worker, and sometimes that was okay. But I mean, that performance even has a place on this list. But you just wish there were more matches where he just turned on that charisma he had and used it to have an absolutely great match. So most people would pick Hashimoto as the best of those three, even though some would say that it takes time to get into him after you first start watching his matches. And after watching a lot of his work, I think I can agree with that to an extent. Actually, note the absence of any honorable mentions on this list. Even though don't get me wrong, I'm enthusiastic about these 10 matches. There was more than one match on here, but on his career list that I watched and I thought was overrated. I guess the two most famous matches of his that aren't on this list are the 1995 G1 Climax final against Muto and the main event of the first ever 0-1 show, where it was Hashimoto and Nagata versus Misawa and Akiyama. I could go into why I think they're overrated, but let's not split focus, shall we? Let's just get right into it, I'd say. In at the number 10 spot, we have Hashimoto versus Tenryu from New Japan in 1993. Yeah, you're going to see plenty of Hashimoto versus Tenryu exchanges if you make it your business to go through Hashimoto's career, and the consistent quality in their matches is really something, I think. This one is not short of that wonderful emotion of hate. There's a really, really intense stare down, followed by some equally intense brutality, and through all the heavyweight kicking and punching, there's actually some consistent arm selling thrown in there as well. They make the big spots at the end work. It really feels like Hashimoto is just falling apart at the strength of Tenryu's power bombs. It's not graceful or smooth, but what else would you want from these guys? The moves that they do, they feel like improvised counters rather than spots, and that's what you want to see from these guys. A very worthwhile match, but we're not finished with Hashimoto versus Tenryu by a long shot yet, so keep that in mind. Number 9, I'm going with Hashimoto versus Tanaka from 0-1 in 2002. Yeah, stiff would be the word to use with this. What I find most interesting about this one actually is that at no point do you actually think that Tanaka is going to win. There are a few isolated moments where the stiffness of the whole affair just gives him some chance, but that really never lasts. I mean, so you might think that just kills the intrigue of this match. I don't think that it does. I think that they're telling the story of Tanaka goes in there with no chance to win, but still has something to prove. He never gives up and doesn't try to go easy on the guy that is guaranteed to hurt him a lot and guaranteed to win the match, essentially. So it's a classic example of heart, determination, and all those qualities that we like to see in artwork. So I think it's a really cool match. Not much more to say about it, I don't think. Moving on to number 8, I'm going to go with Hashimoto and Hirata Junji versus Chono and Tenzan from New Japan in 95. I would call this a fairly WWE style match, which isn't too much of a surprise considering Chono is in there. I mean, even by 1995 he had adopted his heel persona. He hadn't joined the NWO yet, I don't think, but watching this match, it just seems inevitable. I mean, he gets in touch with his heel side once or twice, here and there, and you can tell much more though from the approach that he and Tenzan take. It's a lot of the offense is 2-on-1. You get a lot of pacing around outside the ring. It's fairly WWE style, but I'm not allergic to that if it's done right. And the way they laid this match out is really, really good. You'd think that it would be all about Chono versus Hashimoto, because they are the two biggest stars in this match. In actual fact, I would say the greater bulk of this match is Hashimoto versus Tenzan, with Hashimoto just punishing him and Tenzan only getting ahead with Chono's assistance. Of course, we do get more of Chono versus Hashimoto towards the finish, and Hirata, meanwhile, does the best he can to make himself a threat. They try to shrug him off, but he doesn't let that happen. He takes Chono by surprise a few times, and it ends up he has to get more and more subdued towards the end. So that way, when he breaks up pin attempts, it feels very, very important. So the way they laid the match out is really, really good. There'll definitely be those who won't like it as much as I did, just because when Chono and Tenzan are in control, they are quite dull. I mean, they don't really have a lot of variance in what they're doing in terms of moves. And definitely if you fix that, this match is definitely better, I would say. But I'm usually able to let that slide and just enjoy watching the match play out in a very sensible and, at the same time, dramatic manner. So I think it's a really good match. The finish is lazy, yeah. There's no way around that. But they hardly ever lose focus before that. So I think it can be overlooked. At number 7, is it? Yes, 7. I'm going to go with another tag match. This time we're going to WAR. Yes, it's pronounced WAR, not War, in fact. We have Hashimoto and Choshu versus Tenryu and Ishikawa Takashi. This is a prime example, actually, of how the lead-in can be better than the payoff. And is that a bad thing? Not really. Not when you have this sort of quality going on. I mean, to me, this match is marginally better than both of the singles matches that Hashimoto and Tenryu had in 1993. This tag match is a direct lead-in to the match that happened in WAR in June of that year, and then obviously they would meet again later in New Japan in a match that I've already spoken about. But yeah, this tag match it's got an abstract layout, but it's done really well. And it's not just one guy gets worked over, and then there's this one big gigantic hot tag. In fact, by the end of this one, 3 of the 4 guys in the match get worked over at different points, and they make it work. You know, Tenryu doesn't get worked over because it's Tenryu. He's not going to let that happen, and it just reinforces the notion that he's the most dangerous guy in this match. They continually give us tastes of Tenryu versus Hashimoto at different points. It doesn't just converge, like I said, it doesn't just converge to one big sequence where they're giving us everything they have. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's a tried and tested method, and it works, certainly it does, but when you can deviate from that and do it well, I think that's just that little bit more impressive. So, you know, plus that does not mean to say that the segments between Hashimoto and Tenryu are anything that you can afford to miss. So, and at the same time, you also have in this match Ishikawa not letting his partner down, aiding a sweet, brutal mauling of Choshu. So there's a lot going on here. A lot of it is very, very quality stuff. I think it's a really cool match. That was number 7. At number 6, I'm going to go back to New Japan for Hashimoto versus Kojima in the semi-finals of the 1998 G1 Climax tournament. For this one, I'd say take the mindset you had in the Tanaka match and going into this one, but take into account that this is the semi-finals of the biggest tournament that New Japan will have all year. So obviously Kojima has a much better chance than Tanaka did. And I do really like Kojima in this match. He kind of starts off looking slightly uneducated, actually, I'd say. I mean, hitting some stiff moves and underestimating Hashimoto's endurance, and his facials here, I mean, they don't come off the same way as Tanaka's did. I mean, Tanaka, you could kind of tell, was natural, fighting spirit, Bushido kind of reaction towards Hash. This was more exaggerated villain character stuff, I thought. I mean, it's obviously a lot softer and more down to earth than, what can I say, cartoon violence, I guess, but it's got a touch of that about it, I think. I mean, then Kojima gets more purposeful as things get more heated. He throws in some leg work and puts all the power he can behind that lariat arm of his, but just not enough to outstrip the experience of Hashimoto. And 1998 did happen to be the year where he won his one and only G1 Climax. So we will be returning to another of his tournament matches from that year right now, actually, with the quarterfinals. Hashimoto versus Tenryu, the quarterfinals of the 1998 G1 Climax tournament. As of this video, I'm calling this my favourite match of theirs that they've had together. I'm sure that might change with time, but the content is just so good here that you have to give it credit. I mean, it just gets let down by some meandering in the middle. I mean, after a really hot start, they just seem to be getting trapped in a formula, you know, where they exchange their wonderful strikes, and then one guy hits a big spot, and then they sell that for a while, and then they get up and they do that whole thing again. You know, that seemed to be the routine they were falling into. And it was okay, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't really have carried them through the finish. What we get in the finish is much, much better. We get a Hashimoto comeback that was both energetic and purposeful, because they spent the whole match not just establishing that both men could chop hard, but Tenryu had stiff punches that were countered by Hashimoto's stiff kicks. It was only right that we get a big spot where one of those strengths just wins through, and that's exactly what happens. It carries interest through, like I said, an energetic Hashimoto comeback. Probably actually could have used, I think it could have used one more near fall, which I don't normally say, but that's a very minor little blemish. With these guys, you know what to expect. They're not going to have the most refined match layout in the world. That's actually a big reason why the next match finished ahead of this one. But you're never going to accuse these guys of being soft with each other. That's just not how they go. That's just not how they work. So that was number 5. Yes, number 5. With number 4, we're sticking with New Japan, and we're going with Hashimoto vs. Choshu from '96. This is another heavyweight slugfest. I actually think Hashimoto and Choshu's matches follow a stricter pattern than the Tenryu matches. With the Tenryu matches, I think it's easier to identify a striking feature in each one. You know, where you can say, okay, that's the match where they did this. That's the match where they did that. I mean, the 1993 WAR match, which is not on this list at all, has, in my opinion, the best limb work they've ever constructed with each other. I mean, the reason it's on the list, though, is because there's not a good enough payoff for that limb work. But the point I'm making still stands. When it comes to the Hashimoto-Choshu matches, the format is very similar, and you're basically saying to yourself, okay, which is the match that had the best execution of that format? And I think this is the best one by a sizable distance. This took place in the 1986 G1. It's heavyweight slugfest, so you know you're going to see lots of strikes. But with Choshu, you get all these cool tests of strength sort of stuff that make it feel a little different from the Tenryu matches. Plus, Choshu is generally just that little better at getting the timing just right on his transitions to make them more unexpected. They build towards a full-on strike battle for the finish. Hashimoto gets pushed to his limits with the Choshu lariat, and it's a grand conclusion. You know, really, really fun. This match came the closest to getting a classic rating from me. It just missed out, but now we can get on to the classic matches. So we're going to start with number 3, Hashimoto vs. Kawada from All Japan in 2004. This match is very notable because here we have Hashimoto get in there with a guy who most people would consider a better all-round worker than he was, and yet Hashimoto could carry him to a great match with an epic aesthetic to it that most people would associate more with Kawada. And you can tell, you know, that there's just enough flaws in Kawada's performance here that you can just tell that if he was in charge of the match, it wouldn't have been quite as memorable. You know, example of that is he shrugs off the legwork and continues with his regular rotation of kicks. And that would have been a problem, would have been a big problem actually, if Hashimoto had not responded by not reacting to the kicks with the same level of damage as the average opponent would have. You know, he treats them as if they were weakened, which they should have been. And that's not just good because it makes sense. That's good because it leads for this dramatic, intense finish. And aside from that, you also have Hashimoto's actual work on Kawada's leg, which is actually complete with passion and energy. He's the victim of targeted limb himself. The shoulder and the way he reacts to it is just as much passion behind it. And on top of that, I don't know if it's this match or the next match if it has the most epic Hashimoto brainbuster ever. This might just have it, but I don't know. It's a very close contest. I think this is a really must-see match. Number 3 on this list. Moving on. We get number 2. We have Hashimoto vs. Takada from New Japan in '96. This was the match I talked about in the match's length video, remarking that it's a short match with that main event at the Tokyo Dome. So basically this is a show on the caliber of WrestleMania. This was a match that was fit to main event such a show, and worthy of that it certainly is. There aren't many matches that are quite like this one. Sometimes, you know, with short matches you have this idea that they're going to work at an incredible pace, they're going to just throw everything they have at each other and just see who has the better endurance, you know, see who has that, and then that person will just outlast the other and win once they've exhausted all their offensive attacks. This is not like that actually. This is more of the whole match is a struggle for control, and it's a struggle that is just helped so much by the crowd, you know, the crowd reacted pretty much the way you'd want them to. You know, every time it looked like one of the guys was going to just seize control, every time they sought that decisive advantage, it was just, the crowd just went crazy for that. You know, it's also a struggle that was aided, in fact, by some indistinct but still significant limb work. You know, Takada's leg, Hashimoto's arm. It's not the most momentous limb work in the world, but it has to be there because it just doesn't have. It's important because the whole match is a struggle for control. You have to vary things up. It can't be just strikes. It just doesn't have long enough to sink in, but it's still, I think, important. The thing that holds this match back from getting the perfect score, the fact that really, for a match of this length, it does need to be flawless, essentially. It does. I mean, there can't be any point in this kind of match where a wrestler is just doing something and you're wondering why they're doing it. You're wondering, okay, why is he doing that? What's the point of that? You can't have that with a match of this length. And this match does. It lasts about 30 seconds, but it's noticeable because it absolutely kills the crowd for those 30 seconds. It's actually kind of funny, really. Takada was focusing on the arm, as he had consistently been doing. Okay, that was fine. But then for no apparent reason, he switches to the legs, and the crowd just immediately goes silent. It just happens so suddenly that you're just taken out of the moment for that brief sequence. And it's not just that, though. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when you have a match that's essentially a struggle for control for less than 15 minutes, you want the ending to be really, really decisive. And even though the biggest spot of this match is used to instigate the ending, I think I would have liked to see the winner just get a more memorable sequence of strikes before that. You know, just really stamp his victory in the minds of those watching. You know, those are two minor things that keep it from being perfect. Everything else is just really, really great stuff. Definitely check this out. Which will bring us to number one. In my opinion, the best match Hashimoto has ever had, against Haze Hiroshi in New Japan in 1994 for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. This is easily one of the best IWGP Heavyweight Championship matches I've ever seen. It features a really, really cool evolution from mat work to a match based on strikes and big spots. It's all linked together by the fact that these guys are just really good at selling fatigue. The result is something really, really special. I mean, you know, my idea of great mat work, like most people's I would imagine, is where the guys are just fighting for submissions, fighting hard to get that dominant position. Here we get that in droves. I mean, great technique makes it even better. I'm sure for people that are deeper into shoot style stuff than I am, there's better mat work out there, but for me, from what I've seen, it just never gets better than this, I don't think. I mean, the transition to strikes and big spots that I mentioned earlier, it happens gradually, as it should, and it's also really smooth. You know, it doesn't feel like two disjointed matches just slapped together. They do it gradually, and Hashimoto takes charge based on superior size and does some really stiff strikes to back that up. Hase's babyface comebacks are mostly very solid, and then there's the finish. The finish. I mean, with some of the best matches, you know you're going to hold it in a special place before it's over. I mean, the Nagata match at the top of the Takayama list, that was already perfect for me before the ending. I mean, it would have had to go down a steep hill for me that to change, and thankfully it didn't. This match was one that was teetering on the edge of greatness and needed that great finish to put it over the top, and a great finish it does have. You know, if the last two matches are competing for the most epic Hashimoto brainbuster ever, then this one has the best spinning heel kick. Tremendous stuff. I mean, I can't quite give it 5. I don't know, I look at Hase's babyface comebacks here and I compare them to some of my favourite ones. He falls just short. That's probably my biggest flaw with this match. But that's nothing at all to stop it from being a high recommendation. So that was Hashimoto. It's a shame that he's no longer with us. He could have been a fantastic stiff old man for the younger generation to benefit from, like Tenryu still is at over 60 years old. Like before, I encourage suggestions for who to cover next. In my own head, I want to do Liger next, and for those of you who really like junior heavyweight stuff, I'm sure you'll be on board with that. But if you have any other suggestions, let me know of those. I'm also still working on getting through the Chikara stuff and some of the more recent shows from Japan. So a lot of stuff to look forward to. I will talk to you guys later on.